Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, May 11th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Nikki Haley and Donald Trump and the race for vice president on the Republican side, as Donald Trump today announces that Nikki Haley is officially out of the running and no longer in consideration for the vice presidential spot. Now, this comes as Axios reported early on this morning a scoop that they found that Nikki Haley was seemingly under active consideration by Donald Trump's campaign in order to be his running mate, at which he took immediately to Truth Social and declared that Nikki Haley is not under consideration for the VP spot, but he wishes her well. And this rejection of Nikki Haley comes at a time that is very interesting, with Nikki Haley being this zombie candidate, as people put it, meaning a candidate who has since dropped out of the race but qualified for the ballots and voters were voting for them in the subsequent primaries following them dropping out, where she has been receiving a significant chunk of votes in states ranging from solid red ones like Indiana to battleground states like Pennsylvania and Georgia. Ultimately, Nikki Haley has proven to be a formidable force against Donald Trump, even if she didn't end up coming close to winning the primary, losing every single state with the exception of Vermont. But evidently, there are voters out there that are very upset with President Trump being the Republican nominee, including registered Republicans. And the fix seemed to be very, very easy in choosing Nikki Haley as his vice president. But the problem lied more on beyond what Donald Trump was thinking for the sake of electability. He simply does not like Nikki Haley in the way that he did when she was UN ambassador. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he values loyalty above everything. After Vice President Mike Pence refused to overturn the 2020 presidential election, Donald Trump seems to be very jaded. He seems to be only considering people who have been loyal and day one supporters of his, and doesn't seem to be branching out into some of the more electable options, including people who may have supported people like Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, for instance, which was Nikki Haley's first pick back in 2016, and is only focusing on the most loyal people. And that becomes a problem for Nikki Haley. Not only did she run against him, she actively campaigned against him in this election. It was one thing to run alongside him and to be, with his blessing, a candidate in the race, and another to try to actively peel away supporters from his core constituency. And ultimately, that didn't work. But Nikki Haley still getting a number of votes across important battleground states really goes to show that there is an appetite for a Republican that isn't Donald Trump. But if it is Donald Trump, there is a significant chance that some of those voters do not end up voting for him in the general election. But the narrative from Donald Trump and his campaign is that, quite frankly, he doesn't care if Nikki Haley supporters join him or not. He predicts that eventually they will come home, as they are Republican voters, and in a way, he's right. I expect the majority of Nikki Haley supporters to eventually vote for Donald Trump in the general election. But the question is, how many of them will actually vote, and will they actually vote for him if he continues this very devastating rhetoric for his chances in the general election? Because the idea here, and has always been the idea and the expectation with general election candidates, is that they pivot towards the center. They group in the constituency that wasn't willing to support them in the primary in order to win the general election. We saw it with President Biden in 2020 by adopting more progressive policies to loop in the Bernie wing of the party. We saw it with Donald Trump in 2016 when he tried to bring in members of the Republican Party that were anti-Trump or never Trump from the beginning. And in a way, it worked. But this time, he doesn't seem to be making as much of an effort here. He says he doesn't need Nikki Haley supporters. He doesn't want them in this camp if they aren't willing to support him, undoubtedly. And the same is being said for Nikki Haley. But fundamentally, she is the best choice for vice president, and the numbers just simply don't lie. She outperforms President Trump in every single battleground state, outperforms him in the general election, and offers a lot more to the presidential ticket than somebody who has already lost the race. Donald Trump being against Joe Biden, he needs something new, something dynamic. And considering who he's choosing for vice president, he doesn't have that many options. When you're thinking about who comes in the short list, if Nikki Haley is taken off, and now most recently, Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, following all of her scandals that have just broken following the releasing of her book, and scandals that had really been a problem for her leading up into her reelection bid, but also following her reelection bid, it seems here that the vice presidential hopefuls have been narrowed down to people like Senator J.D. Vance from the state of Ohio, or Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, or North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, or Senator Marco Rubio from the state of Florida, or Senator Tim Scott from the state of South Carolina, or Representative Elise Stefanik, the third highest ranking Republican in the House of Representatives here. What we're finding is that the list is getting narrower and narrower, and not many people on this list actually provide that much of an electoral bump. When I think about people like J.D. Vance and Doug Burgum and Marco Rubio and Tim Scott, they do offer something, but they all come from red states. Same thing with Tom Cotton. The only blue state candidate on this list here is Elise Stefanik, and she comes from a pretty solid Republican district. None of them have really proven that they can win in battleground states, with the exception of Marco Rubio. J.D. Vance got lucky at the circumstances of his year. Ohio is becoming increasingly more red, and his victory there was far from impressive, winning by 6 points when Donald Trump won by 8 in a significantly more Democratic year, which was the 2020 presidential election. My point here: Nikki Haley is really the only one who we have seen consistently in head-to-head matchups against Joe Biden, in head-to-head matchups being alongside Donald Trump on the ticket, that she brings a significant value add. She knows how to win over independent and centrist voters, and quite frankly, she does it even through the Republican primary, especially in those open primaries. We saw it in New Hampshire with the significant number of crossover voters. We saw it in other states where you do find in the open primaries, Nikki Haley still garners a significant chunk of the Republican vote there, because it's the way of independent and even some registered Republicans in the states that we do in fact see her getting hundreds of thousands of votes within a Republican constituency, that is their way of pushing back on people like Donald Trump. That is their way of pretty much putting out there that they want somebody else besides him at the top of the ticket. And if it isn't going to be anybody besides him, they want somebody they can trust as the vice presidential spot. And for many of them, that is Nikki Haley. I can't help but realize that Donald Trump is in a position where he could genuinely change the trajectory of this race to being a lot more favorable to him should he choose the right candidate for vice president. The problem is that bench is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as people drop off of it, as he axes people from this list here. There is a problem in the way that he does things, and that he values loyalty above everything and not things like electability and charisma and the ability to speak to the media. I mean, Nikki Haley really comes into this at a unique point where she had all of this, and we saw it in the general election data. Her problem was making it over that hurdle, which was the primary. But he is clear today. He is clear on Truth Social, as he has been clear time and time again, that Nikki Haley is not under consideration. Axios had that scoop in which they have now revised, saying that there is no chance that Nikki Haley is going to be vice president. And she was pretty consistent in her campaign. She said she isn't running to be in second place. She isn't running to be anyone's vice president, that she wants to be president above all. But the problem is that wasn't never going to happen. And so maybe people think that in hindsight, she should have decided to run for VP. Maybe she should have decided that she was going to go ahead and be Donald Trump's second in command. She should have run a better campaign and really appeased his supporters rather than attacked them, been a part of the Trump coalition rather than separating herself from it. Because at the end of the day, she served in his administration, and she serves to be somebody who was a very strong advocate for him when he was in the White House. She came to him when she decided to run for the election. He gave her his blessing and ultimately said, you know what, I don't want this to be something between us. And I think that's where it was. But then he started going on the offense when it started to look like she was doing some level of damage to him in some of the states. There was consideration there that Nikki Haley might in fact be this spoiler candidate and not Ron DeSantis, when people expected her to get second place in Iowa, which didn't happen. Some people expected her to win New Hampshire, which didn't happen. And so she ended up posing a lot less of a threat than what many people would have expected, which maybe tells us that the style of campaign that she was adopting just wasn't conducive to the Republican Party electorate. That maybe she would be in a much better position for vice president or anything revolving around the administration again, should he decide to choose somebody strong and should he win the election this November. But that doesn't seem to be the case. When it comes down to the Electoral College, too, I can't help but recognize that these national numbers that show Nikki Haley doing well would translate to victories in battleground states. Right now, Biden and Trump are neck and neck in a number of states that are all too important for this election, states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Donald Trump does lead in states like Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona. But these leads could very well be short-lived, and the 2022 midterms proved that Republicans, in many cases, have been overestimated in support for nationalized races. Senate races, for instance, in 2022 that said that Herschel Walker would win Georgia, he lost. Dr. Oz would win Pennsylvania, he lost. Blake Masters would win Arizona, he lost. Adam Laxalt would win Nevada, he lost. There are a number of polls out there from 2022 that reject this standard convention that Republicans are always underestimated when it comes down to polling, and that's going to be a problem in 2024 if Joe Biden is able to win these states. But the way you lock them down is by bringing in a candidate who offers a very big difference to you at the top of the ticket. The reason why Mike Pence was so beneficial to Donald Trump in 2016 was that in a way, he was boring. In a way, he was someone that was just a normal governor, someone who could act presidential, someone who could temper Donald Trump's temper. And that's how he was perceived. He was much more calm and collected on the debate stage against Tim Kaine. He was much more calm and collected in 2020 against Kamala Harris. He was seen as the rational thinker in the room. And Donald Trump was this person who could win in the masses. Mike Pence on his own, we saw, completely was unable to garner any type of support on the national level. Of course, it doesn't help that he was pushed away from the Trump wing, now somebody that Donald Trump absolutely despises. But keep in mind, he's somebody who ran alongside him. In theory, he should be able to win a race. In theory, he should be able to be someone who could get over 2 to 3% nationwide. But he just didn't have that in him. Nikki Haley, in a way, did, but she has it a lot more, especially alongside Donald Trump as VP. And so I think if you're looking at states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, we could very well see a Trump-Haley ticket win these states, quite frankly, easily compared to what it would be with a Trump-Burgum ticket or a Trump-Noem ticket or even somebody like Tim Scott or somebody like Tom Cotton. Donald Trump doesn't have that many electable options because many of these people, too, just don't have the best track record. When they were put up against Donald Trump and Joe Biden in head-to-head races in speculative 2024 polls, none of them performed as well as Nikki Haley. And at the end of the day, too, you find it in these battleground states where you see Nikki Haley doing significantly better than Donald Trump. And I can't help but thinking, why won't he just get over this ego where he can choose her as VP? Maybe she doesn't want it. And right now, I don't think that she does. But nobody, and I mean nobody, really does turn down a VP opportunity. It would take a lot. It would certainly take a lot of maneuvering on the communication standpoint, on the messaging standpoint. I mean, there are a lot of things here that we would need to see changed between now and November, and now in July, in fact, if Nikki Haley was to be chosen as VP. But entirely writing her out means that you're losing one of the best candidates, in fact, in my opinion, the strongest candidate here to be vice president. Somebody who has a consistent track record here, who has proven in this election alone that she could take down Joe Biden herself by significantly higher margins than what Donald Trump could do in a rematch election. And everybody, including the former president, seems to be ignoring that. I'm interested to see, too, who Donald Trump decides to go with, if not somebody like Nikki Haley or Kristi Noem. There seems to be a bigger call now for him to choose somebody that is a woman. Somebody who provides a difference from what he has chosen in years past, what Republicans have done. You know, we are looking for a new type of moment here that shakes up this election. Because Trump and Pence, we've known. And if he's to choose somebody like J.D. Vance or Tom Cotton or Doug Burgum, that's more of the same. There really isn't anything changing fundamentally about the dynamics of that ticket. It will be very, very similar in a way I think that actually hurts Donald Trump. Nikki Haley provided something new. A new perspective, a younger perspective, and a more independent and centrist, at least perception-wise, perspective. The way she handles issues that are very salient to the American public is so incredibly important because Donald Trump seems to be doing it all wrong. On issues like abortion, Nikki Haley distanced herself from the national abortion bans that are being proposed by people like Senator Lindsey Graham. She was able to make this about a states' right issue and also a woman's choice. She says that she's pro-life but would never pursue a national abortion ban because it wasn't politically practical. She knew that this wouldn't be something that could happen, and the way she talks about these things actually does resonate with voters in a way that Donald Trump simply does not. My point here is that Nikki Haley, again, to reiterate anything throughout the entirety of this video, is that she should have been chosen as VP, and that should have been something that should have been secured from the beginning. That if she wasn't the Republican nominee for president, she was still on that ticket. Because I said I'm interested in seeing who he chooses because I don't think any of them provide as much as she does. And in fact, I don't think any of them really change the trajectory of this race. If Donald Trump is destined to win it, he will win it on his own. It will not be by the help of his vice presidential candidate because there are no longer enough people out there that he would actively consider, people like Nikki Haley, who could actually make a difference in the outcome of the race to at least benefit him. Some of them I think that Donald Trump is right now thinking of are just simply not going to help him at all. I don't imagine that somebody like Tom Cotton or Doug Burgum is going to be a value add to the ticket, but it might not make a tremendous impact. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are going to be the headliners for this presidential race, but Nikki Haley could have made it different. She could have made it different in a way that vice presidential candidates have rarely ever done. And I think it could have been such a unique election that because we have already known Kamala Harris, because we have already known Joe Biden, because we have already known Donald Trump, this is an opportunity that Republicans could have taken to really drive it home. That this election, while seemingly the same between Trump and Biden, the Republicans are bringing in new thought, new centrist ideals, something that distanced themselves from what was perceived as extremist and reactionary back in 2020 when Donald Trump lost the election, or the January 6th insurrection, or the slate of 2022 candidates that refused to accept their own election results following what Donald Trump did in 2020. The Republican brand needs help. And Nikki Haley could have been that for them. But now that Donald Trump has completely written her out of consideration, I don't know how easy it's going to be to win this election, especially when all the other choices for VP are lackluster at best. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.